Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter. Welcome to episode 6, where I continue my stay in Provincetown and my artist residency at the Pilgrim Monument and Museum. I'll experience the famous Provincetown Carnival and explore the Pilgrim Monument and walk all the way to the top. I'll be joined throughout by Ella and Win Pritchard of Highcliffe Music and my special guests, Tobias, who welcomes guests to his home on Provincetown through Airbnb. Monday, 19th of August. An incredible day. At breakfast, Ray suggested that the wind would be great for sailing. We pedalled on our bikes to the marina, where a little boat took us to Ray's mooring in the bay. We climbed on board Meridian Dancer, and after a little prep of the sails, we set off. Ray had to tinker with the fuel line somewhat beforehand, but he got the problem sorted. Once out into Cape Cod Bay, Ray said, "Hold the wheel and keep it at 140 degrees whilst I undo the mainsail." I held it steady, turning a little to port, then to starboard while the sails were set loose. Then the engine was switched off and the sails tightened. We were sailing. I got to control the wheel the entire time, and before you say anything, no, it wasn't a pretend steering wheel. Ray instructed me how to steer in a zigzag motion to use the wind. It was so much fun. Then he asked me to bring the boat around, back towards Provincetown after we'd explored the bay. Once nearing the marina, Ray switched on the engine and asked me to keep it steady while he packed away the sail. Once we approached the marina, we swapped over, and it was my turn to walk down the length of the boat with a long pole with a hook at the end. Standing at the bow, my job was to wait until Ray had manoeuvred and shouted. Then I had to fish for the buoys attached to the marina anchor and attach the rope and buoys onto the ship's cleat. What an experience! After a light lunch on the ship, we radioed the harbour master for a lift back to the dockside. Then I was a woman on a mission, off to the thrift store. What a bargain! I'll tell you afterwards. I got a Vera Wang ball gown, loads of fabric remnants, another second-hand dress, a broken necklace, and a glass pot covered with beads for a total sum of $22. Happy with my brown paper bag full of goodies, I pedalled back to decide what to make. Tuesday, the 20th of August. I stayed up late last night, cutting up the fabric remnants into feathers. At first I deliberated if I should really cut up the beautiful ball gown. But I'm never going to be an American size 4, so scissors at the ready, snip, snip. I've made the shape of 2 bird wings from the skirt of the gown. Ray shared with me an old sweet tin that used to be his mum's. It was full of needles and spools of coloured thread, and he said I could use it to make my costume. I took the wings I started last night to the museum to finish between visitors. We had 45 people at the weaving table today, so I got very little time to sew. A photographer for the local newspaper visited and took my photograph to accompany the interview that I did last week. This evening I have continued sewing and have completed the wings, and the dress I have half done. I took the second dress that I got from the thrift store, which was a kind of bustier with a short skirt attached, made of a stretchy material, so I started to cover the bust area with feathers. The netting from the ball gown I am making into a long tail. I have packed the fabric remnants, and I shall cut out some smaller feathers at the museum tomorrow. This evening is so hot and sticky. I've had a quick shower to try and cool off, a bit of reading, then bed for another busy day tomorrow. I'm reading William Bradford's diary, and years later he looked back to that first morning in America with wonder and said,
"But here I cannot stay and make a pause, and stand half amazed at this poor people's present condition. They had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to seek for succour.
Thursday, the 22nd of August. Carnival was amazing. We closed the museum at noon, and all the staff and I started dressing up and applying makeup. Around 1:30, we headed outside to see the float, which was a large trailer attached to a 4x4 vehicle. Everyone climbed aboard, and off we went to the meeting point, which was an area of dual carriageway sectioned off on the outskirts of town. Each trailer had an assigned number and area to park in, and the floats stretched all the way as far as you could see in both directions. There was a lot of party music in the air, people dressed up ready to process, and some amazing sights and costumes. I had my photo taken with a famous drag queen and lots of pictures with the staff and museum float. 3 p.m. we started rolling. 3 of us stayed on board the float, positioned one on each side and one at the back. Then 6 were wranglers and walked by the side of the trailer and vehicle. I wasn't quite sure what wranglers were for, but when we hit the start of town, I soon found out and understood why we needed wranglers. The streets were so crowded that the wheels of the trailer were so close to people's feet, and some people tried to walk between spectators and the trailers. Hence, wranglers are needed to move people back. We had huge speakers and we danced and waved and entertained the crowds for about 2.5 hours, the length of time it took to drive through the town, which was only around 2.5 miles long. There were thousands of people. They estimated that 90,000 people arrived for Carnival Week on this small part of the cod. The costumes were amazing. Such a great atmosphere. It was a fantastic experience. My feet are still sore from all the dancing. Saturday, the 24th of August. My last day at the museum today. In some regards, it's gone very quick, and others, I can't wait to return home. This morning was particularly difficult, and it was the very first time on my trip that I had cried and wanted to go home. Chloe, my eldest daughter, was in Australia with her boyfriend and was being sick and felt very unwell. Molly, my youngest daughter, was also upset as her hamster has suddenly lost weight. He is very old and she thought he was going to die. I had a broken night's sleep, awaking at different times to talk to them, as the 3 of us are all in different time zones. And of course, in the evening or early hours of the morning, things can feel such a lot worse. I spoke with my husband Adam, and he comforted me and had a few more tears. The museum was much quieter today. I suppose now that Carnival Week is over, a lot of visitors have returned home. Weaving workshops, however, were steady all day. A little boy visited to weave with me. He'd been to the museum yesterday and made a macrame bracelet with me. He was so taken with the process, he asked his mum if they could return and make more. I set up the cords on the weaving board and he set to work, requiring no guidance at all. His mum explained that her 8-year-old son loves hand processes. He's learnt to knit, crochet and sew. She has brought him a sewing machine and he enjoys mending items. It reminded me of when I must have been a similar age when my parents returned from the cattle market with an old sewing machine for me, a Jones hand crank tabletop machine. I still have it now and it's well over 100 years old. And I remember making embroidered cotton handkerchiefs for all my uncles and lace lavender bags for all my aunties when I was tiny. I asked the boy which of the rolls of cords were his favourite 2 colours and gave them to him along with a handful of clasps and an instruction sheet to take home, which made him very happy. His mum tried to give me something in return, but I explained I was happy to have inspired a young maker. Such a lovely end to the artist residency here at the Provincetown Monument and Museum. Later that day, I had my final meeting with Dr. David Widener, the director of the museum, and Diana, who had overseen my residency and been such a huge help to me to the entirety of this project. We discussed how it had been being artist in residence, and they were amazed that I had woven with almost 600 visitors. Fingers crossed for a future project with them. They presented me with a tote bag full of gifts, which was really lovely of them. Towards the end of the day, Ray and Vicky arrived to see my exhibition. It was nice to be able to show them my work. Sunday, the 25th of August. I'm sitting on an empty beach, eating lunch and writing this entry. It's amazing that the town is packed, but the sandy beaches around the bay and marina are empty. It's a fitting end to my journey to Provincetown, and I can understand why the pilgrims decided to settle in nearby Plymouth. William Bradford describes in his diary the first time they drank from New England water.
In the morning, as soon as we could see the trace, we proceeded on our journey, and had the track until we compassed the head of a long creek, and there took into another wood, and we after them, supposing to find some of their dwellings. But we marched through boughs and bushes, and under hills and valleys, which tore our very armour in pieces, and yet could meet with none of them, nor their houses, nor any fresh water, which I greatly desired, and stood in need of, for we brought neither beer nor water with us, and our victuals was only biscuit and Holland cheese, and a little bottle of aqua vita, so as we were sore athirst. About 10 o'clock we came into a deep valley, full of brush, woodgale, and long grass, through which we found little paths or tracks, and there we saw a deer, and found springs of fresh water, of which we were heartily glad, and sat us down and drunk our first New England water, with as much delight as ever we drunk in all our lives.
I've had a leisurely stroll through the town, and after my lunch I'm going to pedal one final time up the hill to the Pilgrim Monument to collect my artwork and maybe climb the tower. The tower was an interesting climb. All the way up the 252-foot tower, you can read the various plaques that commemorate the founding of the towns and cities across Massachusetts, many of them taking their names from English towns and cities such as Manchester, Sutton, Eastham, and Mansfield. The views from the top are stunning. I found some interesting facts about the monument. A group of public-spirited citizens of Cape Cod founded the Cape Cod Pilgrim Memorial Association, and in 1902 High Pole Hill was deeded to the Cape Cod Pilgrim Memorial Association by the town of Provincetown to be used as a site for the monument. In 1907, with $92,000 raised for construction and the chosen site, it was now time to select a design for a monument that would honour the pilgrims and the signing of the Mayflower Compact in the harbour. The group chose to adopt the form of a bell tower. They decided to pattern the Pilgrim Monument after the Torre del Mangia in Siena, Italy, one of the best examples of this type of tower. Prominent Boston architect Willard T. Sears was chosen to design the tower. Work on the foundation began in June and was completed by August 8, 1907. The cornerstone of the Pilgrim Monument was laid in an imposing Masonic ceremony on August 20th, 1907. President Roosevelt sailed into Provincetown Harbour on the morning of the ceremony from his home in Oyster Bay, Long Island, on the presidential yacht, coincidentally named the Mayflower. President Roosevelt attended the ceremony and gave the main speech. Construction began on the Pilgrim Monument on June 18, 1908, and the first piece of granite, weighing 4,000 pounds, was swung into place upon the foundation. Work continued until November, when it stopped because of bad weather, and then it was resumed again the following April and continued throughout the summer. On August the 21st, 1909, it was announced that the work was almost complete and the last stone had been prepared and was ready to be put in place. A small group of curious and interested spectators gathered. The stone rose rapidly to its final resting place on the northeast corner, directly above the cornerstone. When the interior system of stairs and ramps was completed, all was left was to install the bronze railings in the arches, the heavy wooden shutters on the windows, and the oak doors at the entrances. These details were finished by June of 1910, and all was now ready for the dedication of the Pilgrim Monument. The dedication was held on August the 5th, 1910, on the anniversary of the day the Pilgrims set sail for America. Elaborate preparations were made for the ceremony. Bleachers were built around the base of the monument, capable of seating more than 3,000 people. The day before the ceremony, the Atlantic Fleet of the United States Navy sailed into the harbour. Early in the morning, the government yacht Mayflower, with President Taft and his party on board, arrived at Provincetown and dropped anchor near the spot where the ship Mayflower is believed to have anchored in November 1620. The President was taken by carriage to the Pilgrim Monument on High Pole Hill, and the ceremony began at 11 o'clock. Governor Draper of Massachusetts introduced President William H. Taft. The President was received with applause and a round of cheers. The assembled crowd listened with great attention. At the close of the President's address, Miss Barbara Hoyt, a young girl who was a Mayflower descendant, drew aside the flag that covered the bronze tablet over the doorway of the monument. The song you're about to hear, On We Go, is from the musical play Mayflower, The Pilgrim's Journey, written and performed by Wynne and Ella Pritchard of Highcliffe Music. The song is in the form of a jig, which the pilgrims sing and dance to celebrate surviving the terrible storm described in one of Mary Brewster's letters.
To a land across the sea, going to a place where there's liberty. We're going to a land where we'll be free, going to a place where we're meant to be. We are strong and we are true, the Lord will show us just what to do. God is with us and this we know, the Lord will deliver us, so on we go.
My friend William Bradford is a gentleman, he goes with us to the promised land. A man of goodwill and there's no doubt, he'll be with us there to see this journey out.
We are strong and we are true, the Lord will show us just what to do. God is with us and this we know, the Lord will deliver us, so on we go.
John Alden is the ship's young barrel man, he'll make sure there's always drink at hand. Water and beer whenever we can, if you're thirsty go to John, he is the man.
We are strong and we are true, the Lord will show us just what to do. God is with us and this we know, the Lord will deliver us, so on we go.
George Kerr is the finest ship carpenter, he will see that the ship gets there. This vessel is sound and it is clear, Mayflower will not sink, so there's naught to fear.
We are strong and we are true, the Lord will show us just what to do. God is with us and this we know, the Lord will deliver us, so on we go. We're going to a land across the sea, going to a place where there's liberty. We're going to a land where we'll be free, going to a place where we're meant to be. We are strong and we are true, the Lord will show us just what to do. God is with us and this we know, the Lord will deliver us, so on we go.
I'd I'd like to welcome back to the podcast my special guest, Ray Tobias, who opens his home on Provincetown on Bayberry Avenue through Airbnb. Thank you so much for joining me yet again for another episode. How are you, Ray?
But things are going well.
Good.
I'm still in North Carolina.
Yes, you said on your email. So are you still not able to get over to Provincetown with lockdown?
No, with the lockdown, Provincetown has kindly turned my water on, though.
That's
so
good.
they're loosening a little bit, but the ferries aren't running. I have friends that I had as childhood friends that are there, and they have, if they lived off Cape, have moved to the Cape much earlier than I, and have become realtors or whatever to live on the Cape, because once you're there, it really gets into your bloodstream.
Mm.
It's such a quaint place. The towns are small, and they're varied, but very much a maritime history. Like Provincetown. Provincetown was a Portuguese fishing village, and has a lot of history, and of course the first landing place of the Pilgrims. Might I tell you a quick vignette on Provincetown?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, let me see. In the early 1900s, the schooners were still plying the seas, and in fact Sir Lipton Tea Company.
Oh yeah, we have Lipton teas.
Of course. He sponsored a schooner race, a regatta, and had a silver cup made. As the largest silver cup I think he ever gave away for a race. And it was going to take place in July of, I think, 1901 or so. It was early on. And so the New York Yacht Club was there, and all these large boats came from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and they were in the harbor. And a local, Marion Perry, a fisherman, had just received his new boat. He paid $15,000 for a 126-foot schooner to be built. And his wife and the people in the town were just abuzz, because the race was going to go from Provincetown to Gloucester to Boston. It's about 42 nautical miles.
Right.
And his wife, Rose Dorothea, said, you ought to enter the race. There's a $5,000 prize. And he said he had this working ethic that was part of his medal. He said, I'm a fisherman. I'm not a racing sailor. This is a fishing boat. I'm not getting into some kind of frilly race. So she lined up the crew wives, and they all got together, and somehow, and I don't know how they did this, they got the boat, Rose Dorothea, named after his wife, entered into the race. And I don't know what his demeanor was, but they did race the boat, and he had not a racing crew, he had a bunch of fishermen on the boat. And so the day came, and they raced, and their topmast was split sometime during the race. And fortunately for them, the wind shifted, and they were able to get up and splice where the topmast was split, and came in 2.5 minutes ahead of any other boat.
Gosh.
So when they sailed back into Provincetown Harbor, they had a broom lashed to that topmast, signifying a clean sweep.
Wow.
And so the town went crazy. They had a parade. He was very embarrassed by the whole thing. He did win the $5,000 and the cup, which is still in the Provincetown Library. So about a month later, they were laying the cornerstone for the Pilgrim Monument.
Yeah.
And Teddy Roosevelt, then President Roosevelt, came to commemorate this whole deal. And he heard about Perry's win. And he said, I want to meet this man. So he sent someone down to the harbor, and they found Perry with his crew, and they were mending nets. And they said, the President of the United States is up on the hill, and he would like to meet you. And Marion's response was, I'm a working man. If the president wants to meet me, he'll have to come here. So they never met. And when the envoy went back to Teddy Roosevelt, Roosevelt just laughed. He said, let's just get on with what we're doing. He said, I like that guy. But they never met, isn't it? Unfortunately, the Rose Dorothea was sold later to a Canadian company that was, during World War I, shipping salt cod to the south of Portugal to support the troops in World War I.
Yeah.
And a German U-boat surfaced, told the crew to get off the boat, and they sank the boat. She was lost for good. But a number of years ago, Francis Santos, nicknamed the Flyer, built a half-scale model that is still in the library. You can still see it. And it's the Rose Dorothea. You can actually go online and see it.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll have a look at that.
Yeah. Isn't that an interesting story, though?
It is. Yeah.
And it's so typical of that fishing workman ethic.
Yeah. I can understand that completely. So I know that Provincetown is not as much of a fishing town and community as it used to be, but instead there's a lot more people that sail for leisure time, isn't they? Yourself included, because I was very lucky to get a nice trip in the Cape Cod harbour with you one day on the boat, and you even let me sail it, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And you did very well, I might add.
Oh, thank you. Well, we survived to tell the tale.
There's still a I doubt that it'll happen this year, but in commemorating the Rose Dorothea's win, there's in September the Great Provincetown Schooner Regatta, where schooners come in from all over the East Coast and retrace that race.
Right.
And so it's not just the schooners, they open it up to other boats, so there are different classes of boats. So it is still a sailing community. The commercial fishing has diminished quite a bit. And what has happened is it's because of the light and the sand on Cape Cod and in the dunes of Provincetown, National Seashore, it's become an artist colony as well.
Yes.
And there are art schools and writers' workshops and things that happen on Cape Cod all during the summer.
So one of the other things is that I was surprised about is the sheer amount of wildlife that you can see in Provincetown. My most favourable was, apart from being woken up by coyotes, was seeing some of the whales on my last day. So I managed to get on a whale watching boat and go out and see some amazing sights. Unfortunately, it was a really rough day and we had 10-foot swells, which was throwing us all over the place, and a lot of green faces. But we could just about hold on and watch the whales. And I remember one sighting, they said, keep looking, we can see tails. And then at the side of the boat, there was all these bubbles coming up, like green bubbles. And the water in this big circle suddenly changed colour and got more and more bubbly. The birds seemed to know what was happening, because they started flocking towards these bubbles. And then out of nowhere, at the side of this whale watching boat, was 3 humpbacks with the mouth open wide and scooping up all of the fish. Because at that moment that my camera battery decided to die, so so I didn't capture any of it on footage, but it was such an amazing experience. So
that's how the humpbacks feed out there in Stellwagen Bank. They release all that air so that the small fish that they go after and the phytoplankton gets caught up in that, and then they come up underneath it with their mouths open.
Yes.
And then it all gets filtered through their baleen, and they broach or they fish that in that manner. That's quite a sight, actually, isn't it?
Yes.
And the Center for Coastal Studies has been, I'd be amiss if I tried to give you a time, but I really think for about 30 years or more has been studying the whales. And they've given them all names, and they can trace the whales, recognize them rather, by their colors of white and black and patterns on their tails. And so they, year after year, can see who has calved and new whales that have come in. That's an exciting thing to do. I really like the whales. And unfortunately, the right whale population, which is also found in Cape Cod Bay, is diminishing, and they're endangered. And there are laws now, even for sailboats, how far away you have to stay from a right whale.
Yeah.
Humpbacks, they'll allow you to get close enough so you can actually see them or whatever. But if you sight a right whale, you either stop your engine or you head in the opposite direction of the right whale.
Yeah.
Do you know why they were called the right whales?
Was it something to do with when they were all whaling for whale oil?
Right.
Because they were so
That's
easy
exactly
to
right.
catch.
They were the right whale to catch. That's why they got named the right whale, because of the amount of oil and baleen that they were able to get from that particular whale. So they became the most hunted whales.
Gosh,
it's sad, really, but
it's
part of nature. But it's sad.
Yeah, it's just so amazing to see that kind of, to get so up close to the wildlife, and I think even sort of with the 10-foot swells and feeling a bit sick and trying, clinging onto the side for dear life, it just made it all worth it. Just to see something like that, and a complete surprise as well for them to just come up at the side of the boat. So it was amazing. I'm so thankful that you took me on my days off from the museum, that you took me on all of these different adventures, both by road and by cycle and by water. It was amazing. I'd like to say thank you very much, Ray, for being my special guest on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials. Join me again for episode 7 of the Spirit of Mayflower podcast, Homeward Bound.